Good evening. Today we are recording the service for tomorrow on Saturday evening because I've got things to do tomorrow. And tomorrow we're going to remember St. Bartholomew, whose actual Saint's Day is Monday the 24th. And Bartholomew was one of the 12 apostles of Jesus Christ. He was introduced to Christ through Philip, which we'll hear about in our story today. But nothing much else is known about him in the New Testament. In Hebrew, the word Bar means son of. So Bartholomew is a family name, meaning son of Talmai. So his full name would have been Nathaniel Bar Talmai. And he served as a missionary in Ethiopia, Mesopotamia, parts of modern-day Iran, parts of modern-day Turkey, Armenia and India. And he's said to have been killed by being flayed and skinned. And then he was beheaded at the command of an Armenian king. And I think because of the nature of his death, he is the patron saint of glove makers, tanners, butchers and leather workers. So that is Bartholomew. If you wish to read the Gospel before you hear the rest of this, it is John's Gospel, chapter 1, verses 43 to 51. And this is the scene. Jesus is heading for Galilee and he encounters Philip. John tells us that Jesus found Philip. Philip thought he'd found Christ, but Christ found Philip. And that is actually the heart of the Christian story. Straight away, here we are, verse 1. It's not that you and I have found Christ, but that Christ has found us. And this narrative runs throughout the Bible of God, of our God, who constantly seeks out his people. And it's important to remind ourselves of this because knowing that God has sought us out rather than us seeking God out is crucial in keeping us humble before God. So once Jesus finds Philip, he issues a single command, follow me. And Philip appears to have been absolutely compelled to follow Jesus. He leaves all else behind. And the first thing he did, according to John, was to find Nathanael and tell him all about Jesus. Now, Philip and Nathanael, as well as Andrew and Peter, were from the same town, the town of Bethsaida. That's located on the northeast side of the Sea of Galilee. I think what's modern terminology is known as the Golan Heights. We know that Andrew brought Peter to Jesus, and today we hear that Philip, when Jesus called him, went straight to his friend, and some people actually say his brother, Nathanael, and said, "We have found him," meaning the Messiah, who had been foretold by Moses and the prophets. So the first rule of being a disciple of Jesus seems to me to be very simple. Go and tell other people all about Jesus. And so often we think we can't tell other people about Jesus because we don't know enough or we don't know our Bibles well enough. But you know what? None of that matters. We don't need to be theologians to be effective. All we need to know is how life transforming knowing Jesus has been in our lives, and then letting our passion show in the way we live our lives, the way we treat others, and the way we make sacrifices for our faith. And once we do that, then Jesus will do the rest. Being a follower of Jesus means to come to the realization that we have been found by him. And for me, that is absolutely crystal clear. Sometimes unwittingly, and sometimes unwillingly. And it's often when we are spiritually and emotionally lost. That's when Jesus may find us, but not always, because today we hear that Nathanael was just sitting under a fig tree, minding his own business, when Jesus found him. And then let's think about Philip. So Philip had already decided he was going to follow Jesus. And then immediately he faced his first setback, because Nathanael's response to Philip is not very encouraging, is it? He says, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" So Philip has come running over to Nathanael, passionate about sharing the good news, to be met with this cynical response. And Philip, I wish I had his sort of insight. He didn't try to blather on. He just said, "Come and see. Come and see for yourself." And that's all we need to say to people. Come and see. We don't need to get involved in heavy religious debates. Come and see. Let God do the work. Here's the challenge for today, folk. We as a church, here's a question for us. If people do come and see us, what will they find? Will they get a sense of God changing people's lives? Will they go away from our services with a sense that something is actually happening here? If they come and see, will they meet God? Wow. I shall be thinking of those questions tomorrow at church. And finally, here's for the good news. Being a disciple means receiving peace and blessing from God. This is what Jesus says to Nathanael when he's just said, "What good can come out of Nazareth?" When Jesus saw him coming towards him, he said, "Here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." And so Nathanael says, "Where did you come to know me?" Jesus said, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." Now, I've been doing some research, and apparently the word see has different meanings in the Greek language in which this was written. Philip has said to Nathanael, "Come and see." And that Greek word he used for see means with our eyes. But then twice another word for see is used with regard to Jesus. Jesus saw Nathanael coming towards him and he said, "I saw you under the fig tree." And on both of those occasions, this is a different Greek word and has nothing to do with our physical eyesight, but talks about a spiritual perception. Jesus saw Nathanael coming towards him. That is to say, he saw into Nathanael's heart as he approached, and he recognised him for who he truly was. And then secondly, Jesus' words are, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." And to me, that suggests that Jesus knew of Nathanael before this encounter, not in any physical sense of having seen him before, but in a spiritual sense of having had his hand on Nathanael's life before that encounter. You could say from all eternity. There's a real sense of peace that we can receive simply from the knowledge that God has had his hand on us, even from before we became aware of him. Now, when Jesus said, "I saw you under the fig tree," well, he was being as he often is, pretty smart, because that phrase had been used 3 other times in the Bible that those people would have known, that we call the Old Testament. And each time those words had been mentioned, it was a symbol. Sitting under the fig tree was a symbol of living in peace and living with God's blessing. And so in this passage today from John's Gospel, Jesus is perceiving in Nathanael that he has lived a good Jewish life. He says, "Here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit," meaning Nathanael has known the peace and blessing of God upon his life. But in a relationship with Jesus, there is even more for Nathanael to receive, far more than obedience to the Jewish law could ever give him. Jesus says, "Do you believe because I have told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these." So I rather think Jesus is commending him for having been obedient, being an obedient Jew. But he's calling Nathanael into a deeper place of peace. He's calling him to a place of blessing, which he will know through a relationship with Jesus. So here we have a well-known and seemingly simple passage. We have this lovely story of Philip and Nathanael, but actually it's full to the brim with very deep teachings of the nature of discipleship. Jesus calls us to follow him, and that is a lifelong challenge, but it's also a life of peace and blessing with God. Jesus sees us, Jesus knows us, he knows everything about us, and he perceives our deepest needs. And if we follow him, as he says to Nathanael, we will see heaven opened. So I think it's only fitting today that our song is, "Will you come and follow me, if I but call your name?" Sung to the tune King's Fold by John Bell. And so may the peace of the Lord be always with you and those you love. And until next week, may God's blessing go with you. Amen.